I'm pleased today to be speaking with artist, author, and activist Ricardo Cortés. Greetings.
Hey, Johnny. Good to see you.
So, how have you been doing so far during the virus? Have you been able to stay healthy?
Yes, I have. I'm very thankful, grateful. I'm safe and sound. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, like yourself, and I am doing okay. Thank you very much.
Your new book, which has just been published on 420, is called It's Just a Plant, a children's story about marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
You originally published your own edition a number of years back. What inspired you initially to make this book?
Sure. So this is actually this is actually a reissue of what was originally my first book, the first book I ever did. I started into this game primarily as an illustrator, and at the same time, I was doing a lot of work in drug policy reform. And at the time, I wanted to enter the conversation of changing the laws around marijuana specifically. And I was doing it in some visual aesthetic terms in art and design and propaganda like that. But I wanted to do something more, and the market was already saturated with books or essays or great journalism about marijuana and the punitive ways of handling people using marijuana. And I just thought, well, how could I get into this game as an artist myself? And the idea of a children's book came up with a friend of mine, pitched the idea, why don't you do a kid's book? Which sounded very strange at the time. This was about 15 years ago, and it would have been a very controversial choice to make a children's book about marijuana as it was. But I thought that was actually an appropriate way to talk about an issue like this. Children are involved in the drug war because their parents are involved in the drug war. Either their parents are incarcerated or somehow affected by what was going on with marijuana, how people were dealt with who used marijuana at the time. And so I thought, I could create something that I knew would be controversial. I knew people would be talking about it. There's a children's book about marijuana. That's conversations people shouldn't be having in that kind of way unless you just say no. And that would get people talking about the book. And at the same time, I would make something that was reasonable, rational, it's provocative, but it's not done for the sake of being provocative. And within the book itself, I hope that I could kind of slip in a lot of sound information that parents could use in ways of talking to their kids about the plant. So that's how I got the book started. And like I said, this book started me into the game of publishing. I was self-publishing this book in the beginning. It did get a lot of press, as I suspected. I was on the Bill O'Reilly show, I was on Fox, it was in lots of publications, and I went through edition after edition after edition until we finally came to this one. It's been updated because it is a new time since this book came out. There's been a sea change of policies against and for marijuana cannabis use and how people are treated for using it, whether it's recreationally or medicinally. So I wanted to change the story around a little bit. It's about a little girl who finds that her parents are using marijuana, and I wanted to update that to the moment. So that's why I came to you, Akashic Books, to reissue this book with some new illustrations, the new cover, and all the updates to the story itself.
I think of you as being fairly anti-establishment in orientation. One of the things that surprised me about the book when I first read it was how reasonable the police officers in the book come across. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the conversation of having with your kids, and a lot of parents are thinking about how to have this conversation with their children because there's millions of parents out there that use marijuana, right? This book is not for people who use marijuana. It's not for people who don't use marijuana. I think that all children are going to stumble into marijuana's path at some point. I did at a time when I thought marijuana was Just Say No campaign. It was very, very bad. I have friends who almost called the police on their parents. So I wanted to be able to create a place that parents could have that conversation. And I actually think it's not as complicated as I first assumed, because kids can understand that there are some things that are for adults and there's something for children. Kids might see their parents drinking a glass of wine or having a drink and understand that's not really for them and it's for adults. You can have that conversation and most children can understand that. What gets complicated further complicated is the notion that a parent might be breaking the law. And respect for the law is something that's across the board. We try to teach our children that we respect the laws and laws make sense. And so it's a new conversation added into the layering of what is marijuana, all that. There's why does a parent necessarily break the law, depending on what state they're in or what time period it was. And, you know, when this book was written, everyone using marijuana is breaking the law. Thankfully, that's changing now. So obviously I needed to have a conversation in the book at some point about the illegality of the plant, because I was afraid that parents might read this book to their kids, talking about where it's grown, how farmers use it, how doctors prescribe it to some people, how it's for some adults but not for children. And then at the end of the day, the kid thinks, okay, that's great, and goes to the school and talks to their teacher about how their parents are using marijuana, which could have very negative effects. Law enforcement can come in and takes parents away from their children for this plant. It has happened. So there needed to be a conversation in the book, and that's why there's a police officer that rolls into a scene from some young men that are using the plant and has a conversation with the kid. The cops are actually the one to open the talk about where prohibition came from. I thought that was just a tool to bring in that talk. And some police officers are actually sympathetic to the decriminalization of marijuana. A lot of law enforcement know that the drug war is sometimes more dangerous and has worse effects to their own livelihoods and the way that they conduct their profession than the marijuana users themselves. So I think that law enforcement can be an ally in this conversation of decriminalizing.
You recently collaborated with the actor Samuel L. Jackson and the writer Adam Mansbach on a public service announcement called Stay the Fuck at Home. Mm-hmm. I happen to know that you've actually made an illustration of Samuel Jackson before. Can you tell us a little about what led you to illustrating Mr. Jackson?
Sure. So, well, of course, you, Johnny, I, and Adam, we did Go the Fuck to Sleep, which turned into from a very small project that we all did here in Brooklyn and California, and Adam, into a huge phenomenon. And that in the beginning of that book, we got Samuel Jackson to do the audio story to that, and that created its own buzz and went on its own. So when we did a children's book version of Go the F to Sleep, which we wanted to basically, the book itself is about this big. We made a bigger version for kids. You could see the illustrations are more lush and bigger. Adam retooled the language to make it obviously kid appropriate. And as an homage to Samuel L. Jackson, who did such a crazy, amazing job with the original audiobook, we reached out and asked if he would mind if I would draw a little piece of him in that book, and actually end up using his whole get up in Jerry curl and blue shirt from a scene from Pulp Fiction. So that's how he wound up to Seriously Just Go to Sleep. And then, of course, Adam just recently reached out to us and said, "Hey, let's redo something for this moment." And Samuel Jackson knocked it out the park again.
Ricardo, thank you so much for speaking with me. I always enjoy talking to you, and I hope you are able to continue to stay safe.
Thank you, Johnny. I appreciate it. I love speaking with you as well, and I hope you and yours stay good too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.